Hello and welcome back. This time we'll be going into the first mock test, which is on listening, as you can see here. We'll be starting with section 1, which is questions 1 to 10. The entire listening test itself is made up of 4 sections, each with 10 questions. Now the first section is the relatively easiest one of the entire bunch. So it's a good way to ease yourself in, because of it, as the listening test goes on and the sections continue, it will get progressively more complex. The audio you will have to listen to will be a lot more difficult to pass, because there'll be much more complex language used, and so I'll help you through it. So and give yourself a little try, as it were. So first off, let us find the audio. Downloads. Here we are. Now, listen
Cambridge
closely.
English, IELTS 11, Tests 1 to 4. Published by Cambridge University Press and Cambridge English Language Assessment 2016. This recording is copyright. CD 1.
Okay, now before it properly begins, we'll be going through it and answering the questions, and I'll explain how, you do that. It's fairly simple, as you can see from here. This is the test itself. It's a simple fill in the blanks, and it's asking for, then this is most important, one word or one number. So, you don't want to have phrases or sentences. If it asks for the room name, it's just a name. That's just this pound symbol means obviously you're looking for a price of something, and they're asking for a certain kind of payment, so you want to put in the name of the payment, but it only be one word. Only have a one word or one number, like they say here. Example, the main hall seats 200. That's just the example. That's not actually one of the questions. The first question obviously is asking you which room seats 100. So we'll be going into that first. So listen closely and you should be able to hear that. And as you answer the questions, one of the best things to do is to, on a separate piece of paper, write the answers that you think it is. And then after you're sure that it's right, after the audio clip has finished, you can transfer it in. Usually at the end of the test, because you'll be going through all the 4 sections and answering them. And then at the end of the test, there's maybe about 10 minutes left, which you can quickly transfer your answers just to make sure that you get the right ones and you're not making any mistakes in the boxes you have to cross out and just make it all messy. Okay? Now let's continue. So start up the audio.
Test 1. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work.
As I said.
All the recordings will be played once only.
As I mentioned in the previous video.
The test is in 4 sections. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet.
As I said, yes, they give you only one chance to listen through, so there's no going back if you miss something. So what you want to do is, as you're listening, is quickly jot down what you think the answer is, often on a separate piece of paper, and then continue listening out for the next question. Don't try and get caught up in what was it, with the previous answer, because you'll then miss the next potential clue to the answer afterwards. So just don't get stuck on something, put down what you think your answer is, move on, and listen out for the next question's answer. All right? We'll continue.
Now turn to section 1. Section 1. You will hear a telephone conversation between an official at a village hall and a woman who wants to hire a public room. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6.
From here to here. Pause it. So what it's asking is, for question 1, it's about the room and cost. the blank room seats 100. The cost of main hall for Saturday evening, question 2, costs so many pounds, got the answer from the audio which we'll listen in, plus a £250 deposit. And then 3, blank payment is required. Cost includes use of tables and chairs, and also, question 4, blank, additional charge for use of the kitchen, £25. Now, before the event, we'll need a blank license. Also, you need to contact caretaker, Mr. Evans, in advance to arrange blank for number 6. So let's go on. This is giving you time to look over the questions. Okay.
You will see that there is an example that has been done for you.
That will be here.
On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
It's just to sort of give you the idea.
Oh, hello. I wanted to inquire about hiring a room in the village hall for the evening of September the 1st.
Let me just see. Yes, we have both rooms available that evening. There's our main hall, that's got seating for 200 people, or there's the Charlton room.
The main hall seats 200, so 200 has been written in the space.
That's the answer for that example question.
Now we shall begin.
Right.
You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time.
As I said again.
Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Hello?
Oh, hello. I wanted to inquire about hiring a room in the village hall for the evening of September the 1st.
Let me just see. Yes, we have both rooms available that evening. There's our main hall, that's got seating for 200 people, or there's the Charlton room.
Sorry?
The Charlton room, CHARLTON. That's got seating for up to 100.
Well, we're organising a dinner to raise money.
So now they mentioned here for question 1 is I want you to find a room that seats 100, and that will be the Charlton room. Happily, he spells it out for us, CHARLTON, the Charlton room. So that's the answer to question 1, and it just he spelled it out for you pretty much because it was you were looking for a room that seats 100. This is why it's a good idea. Like, you know, when they give you the time to look over the questions, make sure you read through them carefully so you have an idea of what you're supposed to be listening out for. Now, clearly, yes, that was looking out for for a name of a room, for something room seats 100. So we have our first answer, Charlton. So now we can move on to the next answer we'll be listening out for, which will be the cost of the main hall for a Saturday evening, and that will be a cost plus a £250 deposit. So let's listen out.
Money for a charity, and we're hoping for at least 150 people. So, I think we'll go for the main hall. How much would that cost?
Let's see. You wanted it for the evening of September the 1st?
Yes, that's a Saturday.
So from 6 p.m. to midnight, that'd be £115. That's the weekend price. It's £75 on weekdays.
Now see, there's 2 numbers there, but they explain it, because here it's asking you for the cost for a Saturday evening, obviously, and their weekend price, as they mentioned, Saturday is obviously a weekend, is £115. So let's put that in, 115. So you wouldn't put the pound symbol again because it's already there, so you just actually type the answer, you write it if you're doing it on paper. as 115, 115. Because they said the weekday price, which is anyone from Monday to Friday, would be 75, but their weekend, which is Saturday, Sunday, would be 115, and we want Saturday, hence 115 as our answer. Now, going on.
That's all right.
And I have to tell you, there's also a deposit of £250, which is returnable, of course, as long as there's no damage. But we do insist that this is paid in cash. We don't take cards for that. You can pay the actual rent.
See, now what they mentioned here is what kind of payment is required. He just said that. They said they only take cash. So the answer would be cash payment is required because they don't take card for the deposit. Like for the actual room, they just, as they say, you can pay
the
for
room however you like, though. Cash, credit card, cheque.
Oh, well, I suppose that's okay. So
obviously, since it's one word and it was mentioning about, like the deposit is mentioned, so obviously it's going to be cash payment is required. So be careful about, like, when you're listening through, like, when you're given a couple of potential answers to choose between, like, make sure you listen carefully and see what exactly the question is asking. Since he mentioned they only take cash for the deposit, and the deposit is mentioned in the question here, then you need to make sure it's that, oh yes, that is cash payment required. If it was saying, oh, for the room, that could be cash, credit, check, but obviously you couldn't put all of those because that would be more than one word. So this would just be cash payment is required. And then going on.
does the charge include use of tables and chairs and so on?
Oh, yes.
And what about parking?
Yeah, that's all included.
Yep. So parking. That is the answer to question 4. As you can see, that one was even simpler than the previous ones because they literally said cost included, use tables, chairs. Is parking included? Yes, parking is included, hence number 4. And then we can move on. They're going to mention about the additional charge for use of the kitchen, but that's not actually a question we need to answer. But let's move on.
The only thing that isn't included is, you said you were organising a dinner?
Yeah.
Well, you'll have to pay extra for the kitchen if you want to use that. It's £25. It's got very good facilities, good quality cookers and fridges and so on.
Okay. Well, I suppose that's all right. We can cover the cost in our entry charges.
Right, so I'll make a note of that. Now, there are just 1 or 2 things you need to think about before the event. For example, you'll have to see about getting a licence if you're planning to have any music during the meal.
See now, you would need a music licence before the event. That was just mentioned there. So, like, you've got, like, you know, these little sections where they're clearly the questions are geared towards what they're talking about. Room and cost, they'll just talk about rooms, so we answered all those. And now they literally mentioned things you need to know before the event, so you know, oh, okay, I need to pay closer attention now because it's going to be these questions. So, you know, and then once you go on about during the event, they'll mention that, you know, it's like, okay, so when the event is actually happening, like, you know, this is what you need to do. And we'll go on to that after we answer, obviously, question 6. So let's bring these back up. So answer for question 5 is clearly music.
Oh, really?
It's quite straightforward. I'll give you the details later on. And about a week or 10 days before your event, you'll need to contact the caretaker, that's Mr. Evans, to make the arrangements for entry. He'll sort that out with you.
In advance to arrange entry. So that will be your answer. They said there to arrange for entry, but obviously that you only want one word. You can only put one word. Make sure you don't like forget about that. Write one word and or a number. Just one word. So that will be in advance to arrange entry, not for entry, just entry. So, you don't want to miss out on an easy mark just because, you forgot the basic rules of the exam. Always follow those rules. Okay? So now we'll be going on after this to during the event. So let's listen some more.
And do I give him the payment as well?
No, you do that directly with me.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10.
Okay? So what we have here is 7 to 10 is during the event and after the event. So, just pause that. During the event, the building is no smoking. The band should use the blank door at the back, that's question 7. Don't touch the system that controls the volume. For microphones, contact the caretaker. So there's only one during the event that you need to answer for that. And then it's about after the event. So you need to know the blank for the cleaning cupboard, question 8. The blank must be washed and rubbish placed in black bags, question 9. All blank must be taken down, question 10. And then chairs and tables must be piled up. So that we've almost finished with this section. Like the first section of the listening test, always relatively simple compared to what comes after. So let's just finish this up.
Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Right. Now, is there anything I need to know about what happens during the event?
Well, as you'll be aware, of course, the building is no smoking throughout.
Of course.
Now, are you having a band?
Yes.
Well, they'll have a lot of equipment, so rather than using the front door, they should park their van round the back and use the stage door there. You can...
Right, now they mentioned at the back, so you want the stage door, as they mentioned there. So the answer for number 7 is stage door. The band should use the stage door at the back. And that's basically, now we've finished the questions for during the event. We just go on and we want to find out about what happens after the event. That will be here. Just go through these parts. Just back up. And
open that from inside, but don't forget to lock it at the end.
Okay.
And talking of bands, I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but you must make sure that no one fiddles about with the black box by the fire door. That's a system that cuts in when the volume reaches a certain level. It's a legal requirement.
Sure. Anyway, we want people to be able to talk to one another, so we don't want anything too loud. Oh, that reminds me. We'll be having speeches. Are there any microphones available?
Yep, just let the caretaker know. He'll get those for you. Right, now, when the event is over, we do ask that the premises are left in good condition. So there's a locked cupboard, and you'll be informed of the code you need to open that. It's got all the cleaning equipment.
okay. See, now we're talking about the cleaning cupboard. He mentioned a locked cupboard that has the cleaning equipment. So that would mean obviously the cleaning cupboard, and you would need to know the code. As they were saying there, code for the cleaning cupboard. So need to know the code for the cleaning cupboard. That is question 8. Now, going on.
Brushes and detergent and so on.
Right. So, what do we need to do after everyone's gone? Sweep the floors, I suppose?
Well, actually, they have to be washed, not just swept. Then you'll be provided with black plastic bags, so all the...
Yep, now we're talking about the floors must be washed, as he mentioned. Not just swept, the man mentioned the floors must be washed, and then rubbish placed in black bags. Now, just question 10 remains.
Rubbish must be collected up and left outside the door.
Of course. We'll make sure everything's left tidy. Oh, and I forgot to ask, I presume we can have decorations in the room?
Yes, but you must take them down afterwards.
Sure.
And the chairs and tables should be stacked up neatly at the back of the room.
As he mentioned, we're looking for something that must be taken down. And as he said, decorations must be taken down after the event. So the answer for 10 is obviously decorations. Boom. And that's section 1. Basically, this is what section 1 is mainly like. It's not obviously going to be the same audio you're going to be listening to or the same questions, but it's going to be something similar and of a similar difficulty level. Now, if you found you had no trouble with this, that's great. We'll move on and we can test you on the next sections. And if you found you had trouble listening and passing out the questions before, I went through them, and, passing out the answers from what he was saying, then don't worry, I'll work with you until you can get to the point where you can listen to an audio and not have a problem picking out the answer it's asking you for. Since this was a relatively simple fill-in-the-blanks section, you shouldn't have too much trouble. If you do, don't worry. I'll do some tests and some work with you, work on your listening ability and your ability to hear and understand British accented English. That would help you immensely with the IELTS, because they often use British accented English. There's also the ones with American accented English, but it's generally they use British accented voices in these audios. I mean, if you get the audios with the IELTS books, it's always British accented. So, it's easiest. And obviously, since I'm British, I understand the British accent very, very, very well. So, if you can understand me and I can help you understand, then it'll be relatively simple for you to understand them as well, since we have similar accents. Not the exact same, obviously, but we pronounce our words in the same way. So let's just finish up this audio tape.
I'll make sure I've got a few people to help me.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Half a minute. It would clearly be the Charlton room, obviously. Cost of main call, 115, £115. Cash payment is required. Cost includes use of tables, chairs, and also parking. You will need a music license. You need to contact caretaker, Mr. Evans, in advance to arrange entry. The band should use the stage door at the back.
Now turn to section 2.
Just before we do go into that. And you need to know the code for the cleaning cupboard. The floors must be washed and rubbish placed in plastic bags. All decorations must be taken down. And that is section 1, as she said. We're going into section 2. So I hope this wasn't too hard for you, listening, and you were able to find the answers yourself. But if you had trouble, don't worry. That's why you've joined the course, so that you would be able to get better and more experience listening and understanding English, and so you'll be able to pass this out without a problem. So don't be discouraged if you're having trouble. That's normal, especially when English isn't your first language. We all have trouble learning languages and understanding languages that are not our first language, not our mother tongue, as they say. Right? So don't you worry about it. Okay, so now we have finished with section 1. So I can get rid of all these answers. We don't need those anymore. We'll go into the next one. Actually, I do need the numbers. Make it simpler for myself. Just delete. There we go. And boom, all the answers are done. And now we can get rid of this one and go on to the next section. Section 2.
Section 2.
Down here.
You will hear a guide talking to a group of visitors to a farm.
Now, before we go fully into that, read what the question wants here. It's a fill in the blanks because it's asking for write one word. So it's another form completion, as they say. And this is actually for questions 11 to 14 for these ones. That's for that, 11 to 14 for that. And then we have for 15 to 20 below, this is actually a diagram completion. We've got to label this map. It's asking you where these things are. So we're going to be taking that letter, and you're writing a letter from A to I in these blank spaces here. So you'll be naming which these places are, where they are, basically. And that will be explained to us in the audio, so that we're going to listen further. So first, let's go back up to questions 11 to 14. Here we are. And let's go on. I hope you guys are having fun. Now, let's continue.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14.
As I say, you give a little bit of time just to look this over. So what it wants from you is obviously, we're talking about a farm, the Fiddy Working Heritage Farm. Now, it's advice about visiting the farm. And visitors should take care not to harm any blank, question 11, not touch any blank, number 12, wear blank, 13, and not bring blank into the farm with certain exceptions. That's question 14. So this is fairly simple. It's just asking you to follow the rules. So listen out for what rules it's going to tell you here. Let's
Listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14.
I should give you a little bit, quite a bit of time.
Welcome to the Fiddy Working Heritage Farm. This open-air museum gives you the experience of agriculture and rural life in the English countryside at the end of the 19th century. So you'll see a typical farm of that period, and like me, all the staff are dressed in clothes of that time. I must give you some advice and safety tips before we go any further. As it's a working farm, please don't frighten or injure the animals.
Okay, take care not to harm, injure any animals. So they might not use the exact same words. It's like he didn't say please take care not to harm. He said injure, but injure obviously is harm, scare or injure. So it's good to, if you have better vocabulary, it'll be easier to listen out. It said, oh, he said injure, that means harm. Okay, I shouldn't harm any animals. Question 11. Now, going on.
Have a lot here, and many of them are breeds that are now quite rare. And do stay at a safe distance from the tools. Some of them have sharp points, which can be pretty dangerous. So
now he's talking about safe distance from tools. So not touch any tools. Boom. So it's not going to be the exact language that you're looking for. He's not mentioning, he didn't mention touch, but he said a safe distance. And what that means is obviously you're not within arm's reach of any tools because they're dangerous. So the language that it's saying in the question, the language you're going to be hearing, they're the same, but obviously different words are used. So this is where having a more expanded vocabulary, which means you know more words in the English language, such as synonyms. A synonym, let me type that out for you, just so you know the word. Synonym means a word that means the same thing as another word, such as, for example, harm is the same as, equals injure. Like the man mentioned before, he said, take care not to scare or injure any of the animals, but here it says take care not to harm, but harm is a synonym of injure. And synonym, this means a word that is the same, like has the same meaning as that word. So you say harm, injure, damage, hurt, wound. Any of these will be a synonym for harm, injure. They're all words that mean similar to the word from before. Usually they might have some sort of extra contextual meaning, which would mean they'll mean slightly different depending on the situation. But most of those words you could switch out for harm. You could say, take care not to wound any animals, take care not to hurt, like take care not to damage. Like, for example, all of that would work, although usually you could use damage in the sense of something that isn't alive, for like machinery, for a car, for a factory. Like most people wouldn't say, oh, you damaged my hand, or you damaged my arm. Like if they're wounded, they'll say, oh, you hurt my arm, you hurt my hand. They would say things like that because those words are more geared towards like describing a organic wound, like something like something that's happened to a person or an animal, anything that's alive. So you'd say, oh, like, you know, I hurt myself, not like, oh, I damaged myself. It's like, oh, like, you know, I damaged my head. It's technically correct, but is also quite awkward. And so while it is correct, it's not as fluent or as coherent as it would be if you used a more contextually correct word. So be careful with synonyms. If you're going to use a word that is both similar in meaning, it also has to flow correctly in the conversation contextually, which will mean basically the situation you're talking about. Like I explained about damage, because damaged is used more in a describing what has happened to inanimate objects and objects that aren't alive, for example. So, like I said, you could say, "Oh, I damaged the chair." Like, you know, it's like my car was damaged, like such and so forth. Whereas you would use obviously hurt, injured, like, you know, wounded. For, like, you know, if someone went to the hospital or if they're in a car accident, like, you know, it's like, oh, my friend was injured the other day, like my friend was hurt. You know, like that's how those words are used more fluently, more coherently. So they sound smoother, basically, if you use those words in those contexts. And for example, and also another synonym for wear. For example, when you wear something, you could use a small phrase such as "be dressed in" or "be clothed in." So it doesn't have to be just another word. It can also be a small phrase that would mean the similar thing. So, like, I was dressed in finery. To say, like, I was dressed in very nice clothes. Instead of I was wearing finery, I was wearing nice clothes, I was dressed in nice clothes. So it's like, you know, it's adding in a little like an extra like word. Say it's a small phrase as opposed to just a word, but it means the same thing. So that will count as a synonym. So that's my short lesson on synonyms. It's very required for going through the listening sections, like the later ones from 2 onwards, because as you heard in the previous, like, you know, part of the recording, he didn't mention the word harm, which is why I got onto the topic of synonyms in the first place, because it's very important that you know, like, that words will mean the same as other words, even if they're not the same word itself. Like, you know, so this is why you need to expand your vocabulary. Like, because otherwise you'll be lost when you hear a word, even that means the thing you're looking for. So you were looking for harm, but you didn't hear that, so you might miss out on what he's saying. So just be aware of what you're listening for. Okay, so now we can move on.
Please don't touch them. We don't want any accidents, do we?
Yeah. Now, like I mentioned that he didn't mention touch, but obviously he mentioned it later. But you can get an idea of what's you're looking for, because he mentioned obviously safe distance, which would mean obviously you're not touching it, so not touch any tools. But he mentioned that afterwards, so you could have got the answer earlier if your ability to understand what he's talking about is a little higher. because it's giving you a hint before it straight up mentions touch. So you will be able to get the answer down faster, and you'll be able to listen for the next one because you're ready. Because it's not always going to tell you what to look out for. It's not going to always use the same words in the question as in the audio clip. So just be wary. Like, you know, they try and trip you up. They're not very nice to you. So be careful. Right, moving on.
The ground is very uneven, and you might slip if you're wearing sandals, so I'm glad to see you're all wearing shoes.
Now, he mentioned wearing twice here. He's obviously saying, it's saying wear, so it wants you to wear. Visitors should wear shoes, because he said you shouldn't wear sandals. So that was a negative, obviously, so it would be not sandals, it would be shoes. The answer would be shoes for 13. So wear shoes.
We always advise people to do that. Now, children of all ages are very welcome here, and usually even very young children love the ducks and lambs, so do bring them along next time you come. I don't think any of you have brought dogs with you, but in case you have, I'm afraid they'll have to stay in the car park unless they're guide dogs.
See, now that was a much longer section pertaining to this question. It was saying you are welcome to bring children, small children, young children, they're also very welcome. But then he went on to say, if you want to bring dogs, it's not allowed except when it comes to guide dogs, for the blind, for the disabled, and so forth. So obviously the answer to question 14 is dogs, because he's saying you shouldn't bring them in, except with certain exceptions. The exception here being guide dogs. An exception would be, say you're making an exception for something, so you're making an allowance for certain items, people, whatever, in that context. So in this context, it would be guide dogs are the exception because they are allowed. That would be they are an exception to the normal rule, which would be you can't bring dogs, because they're required for blind people, for disabled people, and they need them. It's necessary for them to bring them. So that's questions 1 to 14. We've got down the visitor rules. Let's just finish this little part.
I'm sure you'll understand that they could cause a lot of problems on a farm.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20.
Okay, that'll be down here. So 15 to 20, you've got obviously this map diagram of the farm, and it wants you to find where these things are on the farm. You've got letters A through to I going down in this little path here. See here? All the way to I. A to I. And now you need to pick out where these are, and it's going to describe where they are. You've got your little sections here, you see. Okay.
Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20.
Now let me give you some idea of the layout of the farm. The building where you bought your tickets is the new barn immediately to your right. And we're now at the beginning of the main path to the farmland. And of course...
Hang on, let's go back there. That's some very important information. See, now it gives you your starting destination, which is here. You are here, so you need to pay attention to where you are. And then it's going to describe the directions you're going through, because you're going to follow a certain path through the farm. So let's listen closely.
Questions 15 to 20.
Now let me give you some idea of the layout of the farm. The building where you bought your tickets is the new barn immediately to your right. And we're now at the beginning of the main path to the farmland. And of course, the car park is on your left. The scarecrow you can see in the car park in the corner beside the main path is a traditional figure for keeping the birds away from crops.
Now, he mentioned the scarecrow, and he said it was in the corner next to the main path. So, as you can see, there's only two choices here, because it was mentioned in the car park. Where would the scarecrow be? in the corner next to the main path. It's clearly F. Because he gave you two pieces of information describing the location of the scarecrow. And that was corner, so it couldn't be I because I is clearly in the middle. And it says next to the main path, and that is obviously F because I is not close to the main path. It is in the center of the car park, basically. So the answer for 15 is F. That is where the scarecrow is. Now, going on.
But our scarecrow is a permanent sculpture. It's taller than a human being, so you can see it from quite a distance. If you look ahead of you, you'll see a maze. It's opposite the new barn, beside the side path that branches off to the right.
So they mentioned where the maze is. And what we have here is obviously, since it's opposite the new barn, opposite means obviously just facing it but away from it, that would be G, because G is both opposite the new barn, which would mean there, and it is near the side path, which is this. This is the side path. This going around here, all the way around, is the side path. Don't be confused just because it says side path on that part. This entire section here is the side path, because this part going through here is all of the main path. But the only one that can be the maze is obviously G, because H, E, and D are not opposite the new barn. They're somewhere adjacent. They're somewhere near it, but they're not opposite, because G is clearly opposite. You could say also F is opposite to G. That's what opposite means. It's something that's facing it. So I could say this laptop screen is opposite me, like the mirror is opposite me. Something that's facing you, that's away, it's facing like in a linear direction, in a straight direction. You'd only say something's opposite you if it's across the way, if it's across the street, someone's on the opposite side of the street. Okay, so they laid out where the maze is, and unlike a maze, this was fairly easy to find because it's not as tricky as a maze. The answer is clearly G. So, moving on.
Just over there. The maze is made out of hedges which are too tall for young children to see over them, but it's quite small, so you can't get lost in it. Now, can you see the bridge crossing the fish pool further up the main path? If you want to go to the cafe, go towards the bridge and turn right just before it. Walk along the side path, and the cafe's on the first bend you come to. The building was originally the schoolhouse.
Okay, now here's where they're giving you some more complex directions. You mentioned the fish pool, which is here, but he was saying before you cross it, you go to the right, down the side path. He mentioned the side path. And then you get to the first, here, at the corner. Sorry. So it'll be the first, location as you go down the side path towards the corner. So the answer for where the cafe is D. As I mentioned, just before the fish pool, to the right, down the side path, and then it's the first location at the bend. So D. Going on, we're looking for the black barn.
And it's well over 100 years old. As you may know, we run skills workshops here, where you can learn traditional crafts like woodwork and basket making. You can see examples of the work and talk to someone about the courses in the Black Barn. If you take the side path to the right, here, just by the new barn, you'll come to the Black Barn, just where the path first bends.
So it's saying near the new barn, down the side path from the new barn. Keep it always know where your locations is asking for. It's asking for new barn, down the side path, at the first bend, it's H. Okay, so that's clearly where the black barn is. So when the names are mentioned, you should before this section's on the map starts, make sure you have a look over it and see where the big names locations are. So when it's mentioned, you can tell where you're supposed to be looking. So, you've got your new barn, you've got your car park, your main path going through the center here, and you've got your side path, your fish pool, your footpath, your farmyard. You know, these are all the big locations. So the new barn was mentioned down the side path, which is clearly here. First location at the bend, H, and that is your black barn. Let's continue.
Now, I mustn't forget to tell you about picnicking, as I can see some of you have brought your lunch with you. You can picnic in the field, though do clear up behind you, of course. Or if you'd prefer a covered picnic area, there's one near the farmyard, just after you cross the bridge. There's a covered picnic spot on the right. And the last thing to mention is Fiddy House itself.
Okay, now here you had two choices, because he mentioned the farmyard, but after that he mentioned crossing the bridge just over the fish pool to the right. And to the right, just as you cross the bridge, is C. So C is our covered picnic area. So he mentioned like picnic area before he mentioned covered picnic area, so don't get too excited when you think, oh, picnic area, and he's mentioning the field and you get confused about where you're going. You want, obviously, the covered picnic area, very specific kind of picnic area. You know, it's like, you know, it has shade and, you know, protection from rain. Very important when you're out having a picnic, because no one likes a soggy sandwich. Disgusting, honestly. There. And now the last question. Let's move on to that. We are talking about the Fiddy House. The Fiddy House itself, as he says.
From here you can cross the bridge, then walk along the footpath through the field to the left of the farmyard. That goes to the house, and it'll give you a lovely view of it. It's certainly worth a few photographs, but as it's a private home, I'm afraid you can't go inside. Right, well, if you're all ready, we'll set off on our tour of the farm.
So clearly the answer for this one is A, because as he mentioned, crossing the bridge, you will take the footpath to the left, which would be this way, going along, and the only one you've got there is A. It might be tempting to think B because, oh, that looks like a house there, but that's just part of the farmyard. So the answer is A, because that is where it directs you all the way over to, in the corner here, A, and that is the Fiddy House. And now we have actually completed section 2. That is all of it. You know, this is basically, like as I mentioned before in the previous video, the second section is often a monologue, and this was basically a man describing where and what you're supposed to do on this farm, the Fiddy Working Heritage Farm. And it's fairly simple. You've just got to pay close attention, especially with this map. It's like basically leading you through it. It's like a puzzle, really. You start where you are. You have your entry like with a maze, and you follow the directions to find where you're going. Like you go down the side path, you go this way. Oh, you go down the main path over the bridge. Oh, left to the footpath that was mentioned, and then that takes you to the Fiddy House we were talking about. So it's fairly simple. You just need to know what you're looking for. Scarecrow is mentioned. Oh, corner of the car park, and next to the main path. That's clearly F. G. Oh, the maze. Oh, that's clearly opposite the new barn on the side path, near the side path. There's the maze. G. Then we've got the cafe that was mentioned just before you get to the bridge. You take the right, and then when it's the location at the first bend. So that would be D for the cafe. The black barn was mentioned on the side path, like, you know, going from the new barn, like right past it. And then at the first bend on the side path, you have the black barn, so that would be H. And then the covered picnic area was mentioned as just over the bridge and then to the right, so that is C, just here. And the Fiddy House, like I mentioned before, up the footpath, just over the bridge. And that's our map completed. Like fairly simple, like, you know, with the questions beforehand, there was some synonyms used, obviously, so it wasn't like just full-on straight language. He did use touch and wear, but he was also using them in the senses not touch and not wear, and like, you know, it's like he was using the negative versions of it as well as positive. So he's saying don't wear this, do wear that. So, like, you know, you need to know about the qualifiers on the word, for example, wear. if it's saying yes wear or no wear, for example. So, you know, do you wear that or do you not wear that? So he was saying wear shoes, do not wear sandals. So you want to make sure you don't accidentally put sandals here because you heard wear and sandals together. Be careful. Like what you're listening, don't panic and think, you know, don't put down the first word you hear after wear. Like, you know, you've got to really keep yourself calm and listen carefully, very carefully, and you'll pass this test with no problem. Don't worry. I'll run you through these multiple times, you know, these listening exercises. I'll give you a bunch just to help you familiarize yourself with listening to these kind of scenarios, whether it be a conversation or a monologue describing whatever scenario. And through exposure and experience, you'll be able to deal with them much simpler, much easier, much more simply, because it's known. It's a known variable. It's something you're used to. It's something you've practiced with, so it won't make you panic or just overcompensate and just basically just not answer the questions correctly because you're in such you're so flustered that you're not listening correctly. So don't worry, it will get you to the point where it's just a piece of cake, just so simple. Funny word time to go into idioms. Piece of cake means easy in the English language. So if you say something is a piece of cake, unless it's about actual cake, don't get that mistaken. If someone says, for example, oh, that exam was a piece of cake, that means, idiomatically, as an idiom, it means you're saying that exam was easy. That's just a little aside, just a little extra interesting information. Idioms are phrases that use words and has meaning that isn't the same as the words used. Because when you say that exam was a piece of cake, it's not actually a piece of cake. It's not made of cake. It's not a baked good. It's just saying that the exam was easy. So, and there's other idioms the English language has. We have quite a few, and a lot of them are very strange. So, such as kick the bucket. Like, if someone has kicked the bucket, it means they've died. So, if anyone said, oh, my uncle kicked the bucket, that means that uncle has died, not that he's actually kicked a bucket. So, idioms will come up later. They shouldn't come up in this listening exam, but if they do, I will explain them. And I will explain all the common idioms to you in our sessions, so you won't get caught off guard if they happen to come up, whether in the IELTS or in real life, because they're used fairly commonly in England, so it doesn't hurt to know about them. Idioms are very useful, and the use of idioms often makes your language quite smooth. It's a good way of bonding with the other person, because it's like using a sort of, you could say, an in-joke, like a joke, a private joke between two people that's somehow shared by an entire people. Because if you use these idioms, like in just your everyday life, you can say that to anyone, they'll get exactly what you mean. Say, yes, I understand. Yeah, it's like, yeah, that exam was easy too. I get ya. Yeah, I took it, passed full marks. So yeah, it was a piece of cake, wasn't it, mate? Example, it's just. It's a nice way of flavoring your language, just to give it a bit of pizzazz, razzle-dazzle, just flavor. Okay, that aside, that was a little extra lesson about what we'll be getting into later. Yes, just pay close attention to what they say, and you shouldn't have any troubles. This section was just a little bit more difficult than section 1. Section 1 was fairly straightforward. Overall, this one had a bit of trip you up a little bit if you're not paying close attention, but nothing too crazy. So if you have a little bit of trouble, don't worry. It's probably just you're unfamiliar with the language, and exposure will help with that, which I'll be handling in class. Yes. Before I forget, let me just type out idiom so you can see how it's spelt. That is idiom. Now we're talking about idiomatic language, such as the example I used before, piece of cake, which obviously means easy. Now, yes, see, as you can see, the idiom, the phrase, a piece of cake, its meaning is different from the words used because it's not about actual cake, it's about the difficulty of something, that it being easy. And others such as over the moon. That's another common idiom in the English language, which actually means you're excited. So for example, you say Rachel was over the moon about her new promotion. That means that she was excited, not that she was trying to jump the moon. But it's not saying that she's an astronaut, it just says that she is in a very enthusiastic, excited mood. So that's just a short intro to idioms. We'll be going over that a lot more. I'll introduce you to a lot of common idioms, as I said, and it'll make it a lot easier for you, like over time. So that is the end of section 2. I believe there's a little bit left. We'll just listen to that now.
That is the end of section 2.
Yep.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
They'll give you half a minute, obviously, at the end of each section, just to check over your answers quickly. We can see our answers here: animals, tools, shoes, dogs, and then the different locations. Like, animals, tools, shoes, dogs for these ones, and then all the different letters you have here. It's like scarecrow is F, maze is G, cafe is D, there. The black barn is H.
Now turn to section 3.
Yes, and that's the end of that one. So we can close that now. And as I was saying, the covered picnic area is C up here, and the Fiddy house itself, A. And that is the end of section 2. So now we will go into section 3. Open that up and give it a pause. Let's go onwards. Here we are, section 3. Which is, obviously, it's questions involving science. Specifically here, the study of gender in physics. And this will be covering questions 21 to 30, and you have to choose the correct letter A, B, or C. This is multiple choice. So we'll be going through this. So now let us start this. Let me just clear these answers. Oops, sorry. Okay, and change this to 21, 22, sorry, 23, okay. 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. So now we will continue with section 3. Boom.
Section 3. You will hear 2 psychology students called Lisa and Greg discussing a project they have to do. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 27.
Okay, so first off, we'll be looking through these. So we got question 21. The students in Akira Miyake's study were all majoring in A, physics, B, psychology or physics, C, science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. So what you'll listen to the two students, Lisa and Greg, talking about their project, and you'll have to answer each question, figure out what they're saying and which answer is the most accurate, and then you'll choose that and you'll write that down. So then question 22, the aim of Miyake's study was to investigate A, what type of women or what kind of women choose to study physics, B, a way of improving women's performance in physics, and C, whether fewer women than men study physics at college. And question 23, the female physics students were wrong to believe that A, the teachers marked them in an unfair way, B, the male students expected them to do badly, or C, their test results were lower than the male students. 24, Miyake's team asked the students to write about A, what they enjoyed about studying physics, B, the successful experiences of other people, or C, something that was important to them personally. And 25, what was the aim of the writing exercise done by the subjects? A, to reduce stress, B, to strengthen verbal ability, C, to encourage logical thinking. 26. What surprised the researchers about the study? A, how few students managed to get A grades. B, the positive impact it had on physics results for women. Or C, the difference between male and female performance. And 27. Greg and Lisa think Miyake's results could have been affected by A, the length of the writing task, B, the number of students who took part, or C, the information the students were given. So we're going to be going through all of these now, and then 28 to 30 will be a separate part of the section. So let's bring up the audio and our little answer sheets. Let me just remove synonym and idiom, just to clear that out, and clear out you as well. Excellent. Okay, let's continue. Yeah, you get quite a few pauses in these videos. Not in the videos, in the audio, sorry. Just wait for it to pass. Give you a decent amount of time to look over the questions.
Now listen carefully
Here we go.
and answer questions 21 to 27.
Okay.
Okay, Greg. So I finally managed to read the article you mentioned. The one about the study on gender in physics.
About the study of college students done by Akira Miyake and his team. Yeah, I was interested that the researchers were actually a mix of psychologists and physicists. That's an unusual combination.
Yeah. I got a little confused at first about which students the study was based on. They weren't actually majoring in physics. They were majoring in what's known as the STEM disciplines. That's science, technology, engineering, and
math.
See, this section and onwards is where we're going to be using more complex language, and not only that, the way they lay out the conversation, the way they're talking is going to trip you up. It really will. If you were listening, they mentioned in the audio that the researchers were psychologists and physicists. So that's not what the question is asking. The question is asking for students. What were the students in Akira Miyake's study majoring in? And they just mentioned that at the end, the STEM science, the STEM course, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. So if you listened to the first part and you just thought, okay, psychology and physics, you put that down, you would be wrong, because it's the researchers in the study, not the students, the researchers in that study that are psychologists and physicists, this one. But the students study the STEM fields, which is science, technology, engineering, math. So the answer for this one would be C. So you have to be careful. You have to really listen close and make sure that they've finished talking about it before you answer it. This is why you're supposed to write notes, like, on a separate piece of paper. Don't just answer straight away when you think you know the answer. Wait and see if you can hear if there's more information. So, they gave you the right answer, eventually after a point in the audio that can catch you out. It's tricky. They're very tricky. So be very careful and listen closely. Now going on, this will be question 22. The aim of Miyake's study was to investigate...
Yes, but they were all doing physics courses as part of their studies.
Mm-hmm.
that's correct. So, as I understood it, Miyake and...
They were mentioning that they're doing physics as part of their studies. That just means that they were doing... It was only a part. It's not the focus. So, because it says, obviously, physics is a science, but it's not what they're majoring in. They're majoring in the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, math. But they did take some physics courses. They're not all physicists, pure physicists. So don't just put physics, right?
started from the fact that women are underrepresented in introductory physics courses at college. and also that, on average, the women who do enrol on these courses perform more poorly than the men. No one really knows why this is the case.
Yeah, but what the researchers wanted to find out was basically what they could do about the relatively low level of the women's results. But in order to find a solution, they needed to find out more about the nature of the problem.
So obviously their goal, it just said what they wanted to do is to find a solution to the low performance of women in physics. So they want to find a way of improving women's performance in physics. So their aim of this study is B. That's what they want to investigate, a way of improving women's performance in physics. Now we're on to 23. So we've got to listen out for the female physics students were wrong to believe that.
Right. Now, let's see if I can remember. It was that in the physics class, the female students thought the male students all assumed that women weren't any good at physics. Was that it? And they thought that the men expected them to get poor results in their tests.
That's what the women thought, and that made them nervous, so they did get poor results. But actually, they were wrong. No one was making any assumptions about the female students at all.
Anyway, what Miyake's team did was quite simple, getting the students to do some writing before...
So obviously the answer to this question is what they were wrong to believe is that the male students expected them to do badly. They thought that the male students expected that they were the women were bad at physics, and that's why what affected their belief in themselves and why they did so bad. And that's why it's B, not C, because C sounds like similar. Their test results were lower than the male students. No, the crux of this question, what it's saying is that the male students, they thought that the male students expected to do bad. So so it would be B, whereas C has them just thinking they'll do worse than the male students. It's about the male students thinking bad, and the women thinking that the men are thinking that when they weren't. So they were wrong to believe that, but their belief in the fact that the male students expected to do badly, that belief in that idea is what made them do badly. So it's a matter of mind over matter, where believing something makes it true, even though what you just believed in isn't true. So the power of the mind, it's an amazing thing. So that means the answer to that question would be B. So let's just roll this back a little bit so that we can listen to the next part, which would be Miyake's team asked the students to write about what they enjoyed about studying physics, the successful experiences of other people, and something that was important to them personally. So what did he ask them to do in his study? Let's have a look.
Assumptions about the female students at all.
Anyway, what Miyake's team did was quite simple, getting the students to do some writing before they went into the physics class. What did they call it?
Values affirmation. They had to write an essay focusing on things that were significant to them, not particularly to do with the subject they were studying, but more general things like music or people who mattered to them.
See, now what they said there is what he asked them to write the students about, he asked the students to write about was clearly C in that case, because they had to write about something that pertained only to them, was important to them, and didn't have anything to do with physics specifically. So it's definitely not A, because it wasn't about physics, and B, there wasn't any mention about experiences of other people. It was something about them, so it's C. So that is why that is C. And then we go to 25.
Right. So the idea of doing the writing is that this gets the students thinking in a positive way.
And putting these thoughts into words can relax them and help them overcome the psychological factors that lead to poor performance. Yeah. But what the researchers in the study hadn't...
So now, this is what's asking, what was the aim of the writing exercise done by the subjects? Let's just back that up a bit more so we can go through it again.
Music or people who mattered to them.
Right. So the idea of doing the writing is that this gets the students thinking in a positive way.
And putting these thoughts into words can relax them and help them overcome the psychological factors that lead to poor performance. Yeah. But what the...
So yeah, in this case, they were talking about relaxing them to get them over the psychological factors that made them fail. So that would be reducing stress, you know, because they're stressing out. That is why their performances are so bad. That's why the answer to this question is A. Now, they did mention thinking positively, but that's why it's not C. It's not encouraging logical thinking, because thinking positively, that's about thinking optimistically. That's not necessarily logical. Logical is just straight fact. It's not about, like, you know, like thinking about, like, being optimistic, being hopeful. You know, that's more emotional. And they didn't mention anything about strengthening verbal ability either. That's then wouldn't make any sense for the aim of a writing exercise to strengthen your verbal ability, because that's like, you know, that's generally when you say verbal, you're talking. Like, unless of course they're talking about, you know, verbs, the use of verbs. But in this case, no. So it's not got anything to strengthen their verbal ability. It's got nothing to do with strengthening their ability with the language at all, actually. It's just reducing stress. So now, yes, the answer to that is A, and we'll be going on to what surprised the researchers about the study.
Researchers in the study hadn't expected was that this one activity raised the women's physics grades from the C to the B range.
A huge change. Pity it wasn't to an A, but still.
Yeah, so what surprised the researchers was the positive impact it had on the physics results for women, because they saw a great raise after they implemented this writing exercise by Akira Miyake. So the answer for 26 would be B, because it's not about how few students managed to get A grades. It wasn't about that, and it wasn't about the difference between male and female performance. It was about the positive impact it had on physics results for women. That's all they talk about, so it's only B. Now, last question in this section. Greg and Lisa think Miyake's results could have been affected by.
No, but it does suggest that the women were seriously underperforming beforehand in comparison with the men.
Yes. Mind you, Miyake's article left out a lot of details, like, did the students do the writing just once or several times? And had they been told why they were doing the writing? That might have affected the results.
You mean, if they know the researchers thought it might help them to improve, then they just try to fulfill that expectation?
Exactly.
So, yeah, the end there is, what they're talking about is whether the students knew about the study and what they were aiming for, and how that would skew the results in the way that if they knew the aim of the writing like exercise, they would try to match that automatically, and so it would the results would be biased. And, well, in the scientific approach, you want to remove all bias. You want it to be as clean and ordered as possible. You want to get empirical data that's not tainted by prejudice and bias and like expectation. So they believe that the results could have been affected by information the students were given. If they were given the information about the task and why they were doing the task and what the results should have been, then it would have tainted the entire exercise, because it wouldn't be accurate. It wouldn't be like, you wouldn't have results that, because of everyone will be trying to get to the same result because they think they know what they're supposed to do instead of doing what's natural, and so that the researchers can see how it affects them like in the actual world, as opposed to how it affects them if they think they know what they need to do. It's a very important distinction. So it's about the information the students were given, and that's the end of the first part of section 3. So now we can review our answers here. So you have, let's just open the answer ones. So the students in Akira Miyake study were all majoring in, as I mentioned before, it was the STEM fields, which is science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So it's C. Because you had some of the students, they had physics classes, but they weren't all pure physics. So it's asking what all of them were majoring in, and they were majoring in the STEM field. So That's them. It's like the other two are incorrect. And then 22. The aim of Miyake's study was to investigate, and that was a way of improving women's performance in physics. Because of it was not mentioned anything about the kind of woman that chooses to study physics, and it wasn't mentioned about why fewer women than men study physics in college. So they weren't trying to investigate those. It was just about how they could fix low female performance in the physics field. So that's why it's B. And 23. The female physics students were wrong to believe that, and that's B again, the male students expected them to do badly. Because as the two were talking about, they were saying that the idea that women had was they thought the male students expected them to be horrible at physics, and that thought made them do badly. And that so it was all about the expectations of male students. They believed that was false. That is that is one of the biggest reasons why the test results for the female physics students were so low. And it's asking about their belief. It's not asking about why. It's asking what they were wrong to believe. And that was pointed out as it was the male students expecting them to do so horribly and expecting them to be so bad at it. Now, 24 is Miyake's team asked the students to write about, and this was just something that was important to them personally. So they didn't ask them anything about enjoying studying physics, and it wasn't about the experience of other people. None of that was mentioned in the conversation, so it's clearly C, something that was important to them personally, because that's what was mentioned. And the aim, what was the aim of the writing exercise done by the subjects? As they said, it was just to reduce stress, just to relax them, so that they could forget about the idea of that, oh no, all the men think that I'm terrible, and that will make me terrible. That will make them terrible because they're stressing about people judging them. The thought and the perception of being judged, even if they're not being judged, has the same effect as actually being judged. Perception versus truth. It's kind of interesting, really. But in this case, yeah, they did this exercise to take their mind off that and relax them and reduce their stress. So the answer is A. And then what surprised the researchers about the study? And that was B. And it was the positive impact it had on the physics results for women. It surprised them. It surprised them how much, this was really good for the physics results for them. Doing this writing exercise and reducing their stress and reducing their thoughts of the male students expected them to do badly. It reduced that, and that allowed them to do better, and they improved their performances. But as they mentioned, it was about they didn't get A's, but they were impressed by the fact that it improved the results. And then the last question, Greg and Lisa think Miyake's results could have been affected by. Obviously, it was about the information the students were given, because that could have skewed the results, because they needed to see how the task would affect the students without them knowing why they were doing it. They needed to see if it would have the effect they were hoping for, so that it would be accurate data, because it would mess up the entire results of the study if the people in the study knew about what the study was aiming for, because if they knew that, they would try to aim for that. And that's not what they're trying to prove. They want to see how it works naturally, so they have to make all the variables as natural as possible, so they can't know about what the actual study is about. And that is that part, so we'll be going on to the next part now. Okay, so now that's finished, let's move on to the last part of this. That'll be 28 to 30. So let's bring up the audio, and our questions here are, I believe they'll give us time to actually look over them, so let's go to that.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 28 to 30.
Yep. So here's the questions. Greg and Lisa decide that in their own project, they will compare the effects of A, 2 different writing tasks, B, a writing task with an oral task, or C, 2 different oral tasks. Now, 29. The main finding of Smolinsky's research was that class teamwork activities, A, were most effective when done by all women groups, B, had no effect on the performance of men or women, Or C, improve the results of men more than of women? And the last question, 30, what will Lisa and Greg do next? A, talk to a professor, B, observe a science class, or C, look at the science timetable. Okay, let's go on and find out.
Now listen and answer questions 28 to 30.
Okay.
So anyway, I thought for our project we could do a similar study, but investigate whether it really was the writing activity that had that result.
OK, so we could ask them to do a writing task about something completely different, something more factual, like a general knowledge topic.
Maybe, or we could have half the students doing a writing task and half doing something else, like an oral task.
Or even half do the same writing task as in the original research and half do a factual writing task. Then we'd see if it really is the topic that made the difference or something else.
That's it. Good. So at our...
See, now they were going back and forth about what they were doing, and they were basically, what they were saying was, like they're saying that, oh, different writing tasks, oral tasks. So you need to wait until they've decided on what they're going to do, because the answer to this one is clearly what they decided on was 2 different writing tasks. Half the class would do one writing task, and the other half would do another, and they would compare the effects. Like, they discussed using possibly a writing task with an oral task, but they decided in the end, because that's what's most important, what they decide in the end, because they decide that in their own project they will compare the effects of. So in the end they decide 2 different writing tasks. So, like, listen to all of it and see where they end, they stop discussing the subject, and that is your answer. So, don't get caught out by that, because that was a bit of back and forth where they're discussing. And, you might end up choosing the wrong answer because you haven't listened to the full discussion about that topic. So we now know that's A, 2 different writing tasks. Now, moving on, 29.
Meeting with the supervisor on Monday, we can tell him we've decided on our project. We should have our aims ready by then. I suppose we need to read the original study. The article's just a summary.
And there was another article I read by Smolinski. It was about her research on how women and men perform in mixed teams in class, compared with single-sex teams and on their own.
Let me guess, the women were better at teamwork.
That's what I expected. But actually, the men and the women got the same results, whether they were working in teams or on their own. But I guess it's not that relevant to us.
So, as they found out in Smolinski's research, they found that, in fact, mixed and single-sex didn't matter. They had no effect on the performance of men or women. So that is B. They thought, oh, they were more effective when done by all women groups. That's what they thought at first. But no, the actual finding of Smolinski's research was, in fact, B. Had no effect at all. It was completely the same across the board, no matter the gender. So that's, again, just like the question before. They were discussing back and forth, but then the answer is there at the end of that part of the discussion. Okay, and now for the last question. What will Lisa and Greg do next?
What worries me, anyway, is how we're going to get everything done in the time.
We'll be okay now we know what we're doing. Though I'm not clear how we assess whether the students in our experiment actually make any progress or not.
No, we may need some advice on that. The main thing's to make sure we have the right size sample, not too big or too small.
That shouldn't be difficult. Right, what do we need to do next? We could have a look at the timetable for the science classes. Or perhaps we should just make an appointment to see one of the science professors. That'd be better.
Great. And we could even get to observe one of the classes.
What for?
Well, okay, maybe let's just go with your idea. Right.
So now this one is A, because talk to professor. You heard there just at the end, Greg threw out, oh, let's observe a science class. So you think, oh, that might be the answer. No, it's shot down, and he goes, oh yeah, your idea is better. So A, talk to a professor. You just gotta listen for the definitive answer. They settled on talk to a professor, and then Greg threw in that little bit that might have messed with your mind. You think, oh no, the answer must be observe a science class because he mentioned it and it was at the end. No, it was backtracked. You heard in his voice and tone. He said, "Oh no, let's not go with that. That's not the answer. That's not our idea. What we're going to do? We're going to talk to a professor. That's your idea. We'll go with that one, Lisa. Okay. So it's A, and that is section 3. We'll just finish off this.
Well, I think that's everything for now.
Yes, Greg, that is everything.
That is the end of section 3.
Yep.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
So yes, I went over 21 to 27 already. So I will just go over 28 to 30 just to make sure you understand. And so what we had was obviously Greg and Lisa decide that in their own project they'll compare the effects of, and we chose 2 different writing tasks because that's what they decided on in the end. They went back and forth just considering whether they should have a writing task and an oral
Now
task.
turn to section 4.
Okay, and that's finished, so close that now. And in the end they decided to have half the class do a writing task and then the other half do a different writing task. So that means they have 2 different writing tasks. Hence the answer is A. And then 29, the main finding of Smolinski's research was that class teamwork activities, and what they found here was actually, despite their expectations, they thought that women would be more effective, but that turned out to be untrue. It was false. It turned out that it had no effect on the performance of men or women. So there was no effect at all. So that was B. So the men weren't better, the women weren't better. No, there was no difference. So it had no effect on the performance of men or women. B. And then 30. What will Lisa and Greg do next? They went back and forth. They thought, okay, look at the science timetable was first. And then they thought, hey, hang on, we can make an appointment to talk to a professor. And they went, that's a great idea, we'll go with that. Then Greg threw in, oh, why don't we observe a science class? And Lisa says, what would that do? And Greg goes, oh, you're right, actually, let's go with your idea. Your idea is better. So yeah, of course, the answer is A, because that's what they decided on in the end. That's what you've got to be careful with the more complex listening tasks, is that there will be the back and forth, especially in these conversations, where they won't just hand you the answer straight up. You have to listen through and dig through the conversation to get the definitive answer and not the false answers that might trip you up, such as saying this is no, that was false. This is the actual true thing, and you usually find out by the end of whatever that section they're talking about, when they were talking about what we do next, is that at the end is that, oh yes, we now know it's definitely talk to a professor. That's what they settled on. They'll usually be within each, as the conversation goes on, it's like mini sections devoted to that particular topic. And you usually, by tone, you can tell when they finished and they've changed the subject. They've segued into another subject. The segue means you're just moving, into the next. You segue into a new conversation. It's like moving into to that next task. So try to listen out for that sort of conversational, sort of hint, when they've finished talking about it. Usually there'll be a small pause and then they'll move on. So just sort of listen out for that, and they've changed the subject entirely. Okay, now I know what I'm supposed to have done. If you're unsure, just make a little bit of note and then come back after you've you finish the section. They give you a little bit of time to think. I was like, okay, that's the right answer. You put it down and then you fill in afterwards. So if you're a little bit unsure, just make sure you write down something to do with that task. You think, oh, A is more likely or B is more likely, is eliminate some options. Just make it easier for yourself if you're unsure. Like, if something is definitely not right, then you can eliminate it. For example, option C for 28 was definitely not mentioned. Like 2 different oral tasks, they never mentioned that. So you could clearly knock that off. And you think, okay, it's between A and B. And then you just try and remember how the conversation went. And you think, oh yes, it was A. And that will help you out. So now that is the end of section 3. So we'll be going on to section 4. And this is a fill in the form completion and questions 31 to 40. So we will get in on that. And here is section 4, where we'll be going over questions 31 to 40. This is the last section for the listening test, and it is fairly simple. They only ask for 1 word only for each answer. So it's fairly simple, like the previous ones. It's a form completion. You just need to listen out for the answers, which they will tell you. It's just going to be a bit more complex. And like they mentioned before, this should be a monologue, so it will just be one person speaking, and we will listen and answer the questions as we go. Okay, so let's bring up the last audio. Go.
Section 4. You will hear part of a student presentation about the variety of different species that live in the world's oceans.
Yep.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40.
So obviously you get a little bit of time just to look over the questions. So here we have in the section biodiversity hotspots, we are looking for areas containing many different species, important for locating targets for blank, question 31, at first only identified on land. And next one is Boris Worm 2005. Identified hotspots for large ocean predators, e.g. sharks, found that ocean hotspots were not always rich in blank, 32, had higher temperatures at the blank, 33, had sufficient blank, 34, in the water. Now here's a little trick. E.g., that means an example. That's an example. So whenever you see e.g., that just means it's going to be followed by an example, such as an example of a large ocean predator would be a shark, e.g. a shark. So if someone said, large vegetables, you could say, e.g. a cucumber, because that'd be a large vegetable. Any kind of, you'd pick a topic and then you just say e.g. and then you can give an example of that. So that's what this symbol means. It's used a lot, especially in when it comes to scientific papers and such, and also in newspapers and such, just to reference an example for whatever they're referring to. In this case, obviously, large ocean predators. Okay, moving on. Lisa Balance, 2007. Looked for hotspots for marine blank, 35. Found these were all located where ocean currents meet. And the census of marine life. Found new ocean species living under the blank, 36, near volcanoes on the ocean floor. And here's the last part. Global Marine Species Assessment. Want to list endangered ocean species considering population size, geographical distribution, and the rate of blank, it's 37. And the aim, to assess 20,000 species and make a distribution blank for each one, question 38. And now, the recommendations to retain ocean biodiversity. Increase the number of ocean reserves, establish blank, 39, corridors, e.g. for turtles, there's e.g. again, example. Reduce fishing quotas, and catch fish only for the purpose of blank, 40. So obviously this section is going to be very scientific. It's just going to be going into everything about ocean biodiversity, marine life, fish, anything to do with life under the ocean. So let's get into that. Start the audio. Boom. Oh yes, we're going to have a little bit of a pause. Let's just jump ahead. I think it should be soon. Don't want to skip over the good stuff. Right, they actually give you quite a long time to look at the questions there.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
I've been looking at ocean biodiversity. That's the diversity of species that live in the world's oceans. About 20 years ago, biologists developed the idea of what they called biodiversity hotspots. These are the areas which have the greatest mixture of species. So one example is Madagascar. These hotspots are significant because they allow us to locate key areas for focusing efforts at conservation. Biologists can...
See, now, the answer for 31 is obviously conservation. Because that is what they're looking for. It's important, like as he says. Let's go back a little bit.
Areas for focusing efforts at conservation.
Yeah. Focusing efforts, locating targets for conservation. This is what the biodiversity hotspots are for. Therefore, important for locating targets for conservation. They want to conserve the species, they want to save them. They want to make sure that they don't die out, that they don't become endangered. So, conservation, as the man says.
Scientists can identify hotspots on land fairly easily, but until recently, very little was known about species distribution and diversity in the oceans, and no one even knew if hotspots existed there. Then a Canadian biologist called Boris Worm did some research in 2005 on data on ocean species that he got from the fishing industry. Worm located 5 hotspots for large ocean predators, like sharks, and looked at what they had in common. The main thing he'd expected to find was that they had very high concentrations of food, but to his surprise, that was only true for 4 of the hotspots. The remaining hotspot was quite badly off in that regard. But what he did...
So it's like, it said that some of the hotspots had food, but were not always rich in food, because not all of them actually had enough food in them. They were like, they're somewhat sparse, so predators were going hungry, which is never good. Have you seen those teeth on those sharks? Oof. Going on, so 32 would be food.
Find was that in all cases, the water at the surface of the ocean had relatively high temperatures.
And there he mentions the surface had relatively high temperatures, so had higher temperatures at the surface. You just gotta, like with these ones, it says write one word only. You're looking for that key word. They're mentioning the key word. It's going to be generally a noun, like a solid thing, such as house, person, place, like town, food, surface, conservation, a noun. Not not a verb, not a doing word, such as going, come, coming, like dancing. No word that's going to end in ing generally, because that will be a doing word. We don't want an action word, a word that denotes an action. We want a word that denotes a thing, a place, a person. That's what we're looking for generally with these one words, because they're talking about a subject, so the subject will be a noun. Okay. So, continuing.
But when it was cool at greater depths. So, this seemed to be a factor in supporting a diverse range of these large predators. However, this wasn't enough on its own, because he also found that the water needed to have enough oxygen in it. So these 2 factors seemed necessary to support the high metabolic...
So, sufficient oxygen. That's also needed, obviously, in the water, because fish, they breathe oxygen from the water. If they don't have a high oxygen content, it's going to be hard for them to live in it, because obviously they need to breathe like we do, but they just breathe it differently through their gills on the neck generally. Okay. Now, before I go on to the next questions, it's just something I want to point out. With some of the answers, you can actually write certain plurals. So instead of just food, you can also put foods. And with oxygen, you can also spell it as O2. So, like, you know, as long as it's like the right thing you're going for, it can be food singular or foods plural. And you can also spell oxygen with its chemical designation. So, you know, O2 it's so just get the right idea and then it'll be fine. Like the right kind of answer, you can just write it a slightly different way as long as you're clearly going for the correct way of answering, obviously. So that is question 34. So now we want to move on to 35. So let's start up the audio.
The rate of these large fish. A couple of years later, in 2007, a researcher called Lisa Balance, who was working in California, also started looking for ocean hotspots, but not for fish. What she was interested in was marine mammals, things like seals.
There you go. So it says she's looking for marine mammals. So that would be, 35 would be mammals. And this only has one answer. It's not mammal without an S, it's mammals. She's specifically looking for plural, so it's mammals. You know, like most of it is just, most of these with the listening is literally, you just got to pick out the word they're saying, like the right word, and then put it into the blank space. Like, you know, it's like exposure to a lot of listening exercises and to the British accent, to British conversation, and like the way they turn a phrase, the idioms they use, just the way they structure their language. That'll get you used to listening to it, and it will make it easier for you going through these tests. So, like, you know, I'll be practicing that with you. We'll hold conversations until you can get to the level of where no matter what I say, you'll know how to respond to me in the correct fashion. And that will help with your listening, and then also concurrently with your speaking skills. So we'll be working on multiple skills at the same time. So, you know, you get like basically a 2 for 1. Okay, and moving on to 36.
And she found 3 places in the oceans which were hotspots, and what these had in common was that these hotspots were all located at boundaries between ocean currents. And this seems to be the sort of place that has lots of the plankton that some of these species feed on.
Yep. Here's a little trick. Reading through, you can see they give you phrases and sentences that you don't need to fill in. They're already just they're just full sentences. That can help you tell where you are in the list in the audio tape. Like, you know, if you're unsure if you've missed a question, just look for these. You see where he mentioned just now that found these were all located where ocean currents meet. That was literally the last thing he was talking about. So clearly the answer for question 35 should be before that. So it can help you keep track of where you are in the audio tape. So if you're getting a little bit lost, try and find one of these sort of landmarks. That'll help you find where you are and keep you on the right track, so you know that you haven't missed a question, and so you know which ones you may or may not need to answer. Okay, so continuing.
So now people who want to protect the species that are endangered need to get as much information as possible. For example, there's an international project called the Census of Marine Life.
That's where we are.
They've been surveying oceans all over the world, including the Arctic. One thing they found there, which stunned other researchers, was that there were large numbers of species which live below the ice.
So below the ice, under the ice. So 36 would be ice. So that is fair. So he said, below the ice, that's under. So there are new ocean species living under the ice, and that's 36.
Sometimes under a layer up to 20 meters thick. Some of these species had never been seen before. They've even found species of octopus living in these conditions. And other scientists working on the same project but researching very different habitats on the ocean floor have found large numbers of species congregating around volcanoes, attracted to them by the warmth and nutrients there.
Let's move down. Okay.
However, biologists still don't know how serious the threat to their survival is for each individual species. So a body called the Global Marine Species Assessment is now creating a list of endangered species on land, so they consider things like the size of the population, how many members of one species there are in a particular place, and then they look at their distribution in geographical terms, although this is quite difficult when you're looking at fish because they're so mobile. And then thirdly, they calculate the rate at which the decline of the species is happening.
Okay, so with this question, you can actually answer it differently. You can obviously rate of decline. That's what he mentioned, the rate of decline. But there's another way of answering it. You can also say decrease, because that will be a synonym. It's the same. It means the same thing. Like the decrease in numbers, the decline of numbers, it's the same thing. So you could say the rate of decline, the rate of decrease. So if either of those words would be correct. So you've got a little bit of wiggle room, just get the right, go along the right way. Using a synonym of the right word. It's like something that means the same thing. Like in this case, decline, decrease. Those are perfect, either of those. Like remember before they mentioned alternate answers. You put a slash. That would be decline, decrease. This would be an alternate answer. This word decrease would be an alternate answer, and is also correct. Okay, going on to the
So far, only 1,500 species have been assessed, but they want to increase this figure to 20,000. For each one they assess, they use the data they collect on that species to produce a map showing its distribution. Ultimately, they...
Right, so that would be a map of distribution, would be a distribution map. There we go. So that's a map of distribution, just distribution map. It's just you got to place it slightly different and map, simple as.
Will be able to use these to figure out not only where most species are located, but also where they are most threatened. So, finally, what can be done to retain the diversity of species in the world's oceans? Firstly, we need to set up more reserves in our oceans, places where marine species are protected. We have some, but not enough. In addition, to preserve species such as leatherback turtles, which live out in the high seas but have their nesting sites on the American coast, we need to create corridors for migration, so they could...
So, migration corridors for migration, so migration corridors, establish migration corridors. Now, one of the problems you may have with the listening tests is when you're listening not only to words that you've never come across before, you'll have trouble spelling them. So that's why it's a good idea to keep practicing, so that you will diversify your word choice. So you can know these, that you'll be familiar with these strange words that you've never heard before, and then you can look them up and find out how to spell them. Like if you ever have trouble spelling a word, just ask me. I know how to spell pretty much a good 90 to 99% of words in the English language, barring obviously incredibly obscure words that even I have not seen before. But for this kind of language, especially and even beyond, I would have no trouble. So please do not hesitate to ask me if you have trouble spelling a word. I can help you with that, and we can just put it into your memory so that you can remember it for next time. All right. So now let's go on to the last question.
Get from one area to another safely. As well as this, action needs to be taken to lower the levels of fishing quotas to prevent overfishing of endangered species. And finally, there's the problem of bycatch. This refers to the catching of unwanted fish by fishing boats. They're returned to the sea, but they're often dead or dying. If these commercial fishing boats used equipment which was more selective so that only the fish wanted for consumption were caught...
So only the fish wanted for consumption. So you catch fish only for the purpose of consumption, eating. That's what consumption means. Instead of, what he's talking about there is catch and release. The practice of catching a fish and then like basically releasing it back into the ocean. It's all for generally bragging rights. So this is how many fish I've caught. Look at that, you know, post a selfie, put it on Instagram, all that kind of thing. But instead of doing that, because that can be quite damaging, you know, like a lot of fish, when they get caught and released, it's quite a shock for them and they die. So only catching fish for the purpose of eating them is more useful. There's no waste. Because, like, you know, just catching fish to show them off is quite wasteful, because often a lot of them die. Because of that it's too much, it's too shocking for their system. But, you know, it's like, can you imagine if you were like, you know, you just caught, strung up, and then like thrown back into your house? You'd be like, you know, like, what the hell just happened? It would be quite traumatic. So simply for the purpose of consumption. He says consumption, not so you can't say eating. It's like that word consumption. It's a very long word. Like, you know, it's good to remember how to spell that. Okay, so now let's just finish this off.
This problem could be overcome. Okay, so does anyone have any questions?
Okay. And I believe that is
the end of section 4.
Yes.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Okay, so yeah, now we would go over our answers here. So let's head up to the top. So what we did here is, obviously let's bring that up. So now 31. So as it was mentioned before, it was important for locating targets for conservation. Conservation, see that word there? It's a long word. You should remember how it's spelt. Very useful word to know. Conserving something means preserving it, means saving it.
That is the end of the listening test.
Okay, yes. I think there's a little
You
bit
now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet.
Yeah. So, yes, after
Please stop writing and wait for your question booklet to be collected.
Okay. So, yes, basically at the end of the listening test, they'll give you 10 minutes to fill out any blank spaces you've missed. Like, you know, if you've taken notes on each question but you haven't put them into the blank spaces already, then they'll give you 10 minutes at the end of the test to do that. So this is the time you need to take to make sure that you've answered every question, because it's best, obviously, if you can answer them as you go, because the audio will be fresh in your mind, so it'll be easier to get the right answer. But, you know, it's like practice with the listening test will just make it easier for you. You'll just be more confident, like, you know, like identifying English words and the, like, you know, the accent and the information that is being presented to you through the audio. So, like, you know, we'll do a lot of audio, like listening practice tests, and, you know, like preparation for the listening practice. So, like, you know, that'll be pretty fun. I'm looking forward to it. Anyway, continuing on with the answer checking. Obviously, like, they found that ocean hotspots, they were not always rich in food or foods. You can use, like, you know, this is a plural, or singular, like just foods, both correct. And they had higher temperatures at the surface of the ocean, like, you know, like closer to, obviously, the, like, you know, the air. And 34 had sufficient oxygen, or O2. Both of those are correct in the water. Now, and Lisa Balance was looked for hotspots for marine mammals. Mammals, that's animals. But they said mammals, so you don't want to put animals, because they're looking for mammals, like, you know, specifically marine mammals. Like, you know, ones like dolphins, they're a mammal. Right? And census of marine life, 36, they found new ocean species living under the ice, as they said, ice. And then, you know, it's like going on, yeah, the global marine species assessment, they were checking the rate of decline, as he said, but you can also say decrease, because that is a synonym, it means the same thing, so both answers will be correct, decline or decrease. It's always best to listen for the word he says and use that, because you're you'll be definitely sure you're writing the right thing. But a synonym that means the exact same thing would also be accepted in certain cases. In this case, decrease. And then 38, that was map, is make a distribution map. As he said a map of distribution, so distribution map for each one. And 39, they were talking about the migration corridors for turtles. They first mentioned the turtles, and then afterwards they said corridors of migration or corridors for migration for the turtles. So you just got to get to that right point. It's like when he mentioned corridors, I was like, okay, what kind of corridor? It was a migration corridor, and that's your answer. And then 40, they were talking about, like I just said, catching fish only for the purpose of consumption. Right there. Yeah. And that is the listening test finished. Like, in a normal listening test, you would have 10 minutes to transfer your answers. Obviously, we've been going over it. I hope you didn't have any trouble, just following along and you saw how I got to the answers. I tried to explain them as well as possible. I hope you were able to understand. If you didn't, don't worry. I will help you get to the point where you would have no trouble following along with this, and in fact it'll be child's play. That's my aim, to get you to the point where you'll be better than me. I think that would be pretty great, don't you? Okay, so thank you for following along with the listening test. Next video we'll be going into the reading test, which also has 4 sections, and it also has 4 audios, 4 audio clips to go along with it. So we'll be going through those, and I'm looking forward to it. Okay, I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.